Hello and welcome back to Gapeys Grub. Today I'm going to show you how I make lye soap using a slow cooker. So this is called a hot process method. I've been using this method for at least the last couple of years. Before that I was using the cold process method, which does not use a slow cooker or any kind of heating other than the oils. So I really like this method because it really decreases the cure time of your soap, and I am not very patient when it comes to that. So I use a soap calculator, and I recommend if you're going to make soap that you definitely use a soap calculator, and that will tell you how much lye to use based on the oils that you choose. So each oil has different properties, and the amount of lye that you need for those oils is going to change based on which ones you pick. So I've got a lot of different oils that I like to use in my soap, but you can modify your recipe to whatever oils that you have on hand. But I like to use the soapcalc.net calculator because it's very detailed. It even tells you the different qualities in your soap, like the hardness, the cleansing, conditioning, bubbliness, and creaminess. So I'll put my recipe on the description of this video so you can see what recipe that I used. And this is one, every single recipe that I make is different depending on just what oils that I have on hand. So let's get started. Now I would recommend getting a dedicated slow cooker when you make soap because you don't really want to use this for cooking. So the first thing we're going to do is melt our solid oils first. So palm oil is surprisingly easy to find. If you go to your grocery store, they likely have it. It's in the shortening section. So this is a vegetable shortening, and the only ingredient is palm oil. So this is perfect for making soap. So for this recipe, I'm going to be using 5 ounces of palm oil. And we're going to use 9 grams of coconut oil. And I get this big jug of coconut oil. This is cold processed. I think cold processed is probably the best one to use, but you can use refined also. But you can find this pretty easily at most Costco's. 9 ounces of coconut oil. So next up we have our beeswax, and you can get beeswax pellets which melt a lot easier. So this is what I've been using, but I'm almost out. So I also have some beeswax that I rendered myself from our beehives. So this is in more of a solid block, so this is going to take a little bit longer to melt. So I'm going to be using 1 ounce of beeswax. So we'll use up the rest of this. And the rest, we'll just cut this into chunks and add these. Alright, and then the last one is going to be palm kernel oil. So palm kernel oil is a very hard oil. So this is going to really harden up our bar a little bit. So I'm going to use 5 ounces of the palm kernel oil, and this is really hard to get out of here, so I just chip at it with a knife. This is just a butter knife. So I'm going to chip that out of there and add it to the pot. Alright, so now we're going to get these on the crock pot and melt these up. So I like to start it on high when I'm melting the solid oils. So we got that cranked up to high. So I'm going to go ahead and put the lid on. So we'll check back in a few minutes and see how it's doing. Give it a stir. It's been about 10 minutes and we're starting to see some melting going on. So we're just going to give it a little stir. Make sure that hard beeswax is there on the bottom, since that's going to take longer to melt. We're just going to check back about every 10 minutes or so and give it a stir. Time to give it another stir, and we're getting pretty close. Shouldn't be too much longer. And I also recommend getting an instant read thermometer just so you can check on the temperature. It's currently at around 150 degrees. And if you don't have a gun like this, you can also use a regular thermometer like this one. So another 10 minutes or so and we should be ready. So all that's left is a little bit of the beeswax. And let's check the temperature again. So we're about 160 degrees. So that should be hot enough to melt the beeswax. So I'm actually gonna turn it down to low and just wait for the rest of the beeswax to melt. So if we were using all pellets, this would be melted right now, but since we've got those big blocks, the beeswax is taking a little bit longer than usual. Alright, so it's been about 45 minutes and the oils are at 180 degrees and there's still a little piece that's left. We're going to be blending this up, so that's probably fine. So now I'm going to go ahead and add the liquid oils to the mix, and that will bring down the temperature a little bit. So I'm not going to put this hot thing on the scale, so I'm going to measure the oils using a measuring cup instead. So I'm going to use this cup here. Alright, so we're at 0, so we're going to start with the almond oil, and this is a sweet almond oil, and I like to use all organic oils in my soap. It's not required, but it's what I like to use. So we're going to put 2 ounces of the sweet almond oil. And then we're going to use castor oil. So castor oil is kind of, it seems like a weird thing to add to soap, but this really helps with good lather. So I'm going to be using, I usually use 1 ounce, but I'm going to go with 1.5 ounces. Olive oil is a really popular oil to use in soap, so a lot of people use that, and it's really easy to find. Again, this is an organic one from Kirkland brand from Costco. So we're going to add 9 ounces of the olive oil. Alright, and that is all of the liquid oils that we're going to be adding. So I'm going to go ahead and just add that directly to the pot. So it looks like our beeswax is already pretty much melted. Alright, so we're just going to let this sit for now. And I'm going to go ahead and get the lye and water mixture ready. First we're going to measure out our water in 1 container. And I like to use distilled water just to make it as clean as possible, but you can use whatever type of water you really want to. I've also used tap water before. So we're going to add 10.5 ounces. And then we're going to measure our lye in a separate container. So I've got a smaller measuring cup here for the lye. And anytime we're working with lye, we want to make sure we're wearing gloves and glasses. Alright, so here's the lye that I'm using. It's also called sodium hydroxide, and these are in bead form. So this is a little bit old, so it's got a little bit of chunks in there, so I need to shake it up a little bit to break that apart. So for the lye in our recipe, we're going to be needing 4 ounces of lye. So when measuring the lye, I like to be more exact, so I usually measure the lye in grams. So I'm going to switch over to the grams, and for grams we need 113 grams. So there's still some big chunks in there, so I just need to be careful when I pour these out. So, and this is a dry, make sure you use a dry container. So 113 grams. Alright, so now to combine these, so right now the temperature of this water, I'll just show you the temperature of the water. You want cold water or room temperature water. Right now it's at 64 degrees. And when you add the lye to the water, make sure you add the lye to the water and not the other way around. So when you mix those together, there's going to be a chemical reaction, and this water is going to get boiling hot. So, and it's also going to steam, and that steam is pretty toxic. So I always do this step outside. So let's go ahead and go outside. So I've got a trivet here that I can set this on, because this is going to get really hot, so you don't want to put that on any surface that can't handle that. So here is our lye. So I'm just going to slowly, make sure you wear gloves, I'm going to slowly pour the lye into the water and then give it a mix. You can already, you may not be able to see it, but it's already starting to steam. So make sure you're not in the path of the steam. You don't want to breathe that in. We're just going to give it a stir so it's going to get kind of a milky color, and once it's all dissolved it'll be more clear. And I've got my temperature, I've got a different temperature thing here just to keep track of the temperature. So it's pretty close to 175 degrees right now. So we're just going to let this sit for a couple minutes and then we'll bring it back inside. So I've got some black cap raspberry juice, so I wanted to add a little bit of this for color. So I'm not going to measure it, I'm just going to add a little bit. Well, that's interesting. It actually turned, looks like it turned green. So that just adds a little bit of color. And adding a little bit of extra moisture to the recipe isn't going to make that big of a difference. You may have to cure it a little bit longer if there's more excess moisture. It's starting to turn kind of an orangish color, it looks like. Next time I might try adding a little bit more. So right now, so that actually decreased since the juice was kind of cold, so it actually brought the temperature down a little bit. So it's at 150 degrees, so we're going to go ahead and bring this inside now and add it to our oils. Alright, so we have our lye mixture here, and we're just going to make sure you're wearing gloves again. Make sure to slowly add the mixture to our oils. And I did want to mention you can neutralize lye with vinegar. So if you do happen to get this on yourself, or when you're washing anything that has lye in it, you want to add a little bit of vinegar, and that will help neutralize the chemicals. Alright, so we got that in there. So next we're going to be blending this together. Most people use a stick blender, but I've also seen people use a regular hand blender. I've got a dedicated stick blender for my soap, so that is what I'm going to be using. So we're just going to mix this for about a minute. So as you blend it, it'll start becoming more thick, and the longer you blend it, the thicker it'll get. So you just want it to come together and leave a slight trace. So I'm just going to blend it just a tiny bit longer. Alright, so that's good. So we're going to go ahead and shake off any excess soap that's on the blender. And we've still got it on low temperature. Now we're going to go ahead and cover it and let it sit for about 15 minutes. It's important to keep an eye on your soap while it's cooking because it could go fast. So right now, it's hard to tell, but what happened is actually the sides kind of foamed in over itself. So it's kind of foamy right now. So that took about 10 minutes. And the soap is gonna go through several different stages. So I'm gonna go ahead and give it a stir right now. And sometimes it will get really hard in the center. I think because I have a little bit more moisture in this one, it didn't do that. But that usually happens, and it's fine to go ahead and stir that in and just break up any hard bits that are in there. So we're going to go ahead and cover that back up and check back in a few more minutes. Alright, it's been another 10 minutes and you can see that it's starting to boil again into itself. So we're going to give it another stir here. So it's kind of looking a little bit like mashed potatoes. I'm just going to check the temperature here. So we're over 200 degrees right now. I'm going to go ahead and turn it off for a little bit. I don't want it to get too hot. What we're looking for is the gel stage. So that's going to look like kind of like Vaseline. So we should be getting there in the next 10 minutes or so. So we're looking pretty Vaseline-y now. And we're going to check the temperature. So we're down to about 185 degrees. So I'm going to go ahead and let this cool off some more so that we can add our essential oils. One thing that you'll need to do is, depending on which fragrance oils or essential oils you're using, you want to check the flash point. And I'm going to leave the lid off to help cool it off a little bit more. So the flash point is really important because you don't want to add these to your soap above the flash point, because the fragrance will just dissipate and you won't be able to smell it at all. So this here is a spike lavender organic essential oil from Mountain Rose Herbs. And normally they won't say on the bottle what the flash point is, so you will have to Google it. I did Google this one, and it looks like this one is around 130 degrees. So I need to let this cool to under 130 degrees before I add it. Lavender is one of those that has a pretty low flash point, so you'll just want to look and see. You can also use a combination of oils. For this one, I'm actually going to do a combination of this eucalyptus globulus and the lavender. So I'll have to, actually this one does say on it what the flash point is, so this one is actually 120 degrees. So I'm going to have to let this cool to under 120 degrees before I add these. So I'm just going to do kind of a half and half on these two. And for this amount of soap, I'm going to be adding about a little over half an ounce, a little over a half an ounce of the oils. And I like to use organic essential oils for all of my soaps. Fragrance oils are normally synthetic, and a lot of people have a hard time with synthetic oils causing irritation and stuff. So I stick to the essential oils. So we're just going to let this sit here until we get below those temperatures, and then we'll add our essential oils. And I'll just come back and stir this every 5 minutes or so to help cool it down faster. So while our soap is cooling, I just wanted to show you some of the molds that I used. So this is the one I started out using. This is kind of a fancy mold. These dividers come out, so what you do is basically you pour your soap in the bottom and then put the sliders in, and then when it's dry you remove the sliders and you have bars of soap. So this is kind of a fun one. I haven't actually used this one in a while. I used it more when I did the cold process soap because the top was really smooth. So the one that I like to use now is this one here. So this is just a log mold, and I've got a soap cutter that I use to cut the mold. I give it about 24 hours and then I take it out of the mold and cut it. So this is what I've been using now, and it's a flexible container, so that I got it at Crafter's Choice. So it comes out of here really easily, so I really liked this one. And then I usually have a little bit of excess soap left over, and I like to do that, put that in this mold here. So any extra soap, I usually end up with about 2 or 3 little round soaps. And these come in a bunch of different shapes too. I also have a heart-shaped one. So those are the different kind of containers that I like to use, or molds, for the soap. If you don't have any, you can use pretty much anything. You can even use, for example, a loaf pan for making bread. I would just line it with some plastic wrap or something, just so that it's easier to get out. But that's what we're going to be using today, is this one here, and then any extra will go in the round molds. So let's check back with our soap. Alright, so I've been stirring this about every 5 minutes or so. So it's taking a little while to come down to temperature. So we're just going to check where we're at right now. So we're at 137 degrees. So we're getting pretty close. We're going to just give it another few minutes so we get below that flash point. So another 5 more minutes and we should be ready to go. Alright, we're finally at a low enough temperature to add our essential oils. And when you stir, you want to make sure that you scrape the sides of the bowl, because it will get really hard, and you want to get all that mixed in. And you don't want to leave this away for too long, because if it gets too cool, it's going to be a really hard mass, and you won't be able to scrape it out. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and just pour our oils in and stir them up really good. And sometimes, depending on the essential oil that you're adding, it will really thicken up the soap. So you can see it's already getting a lot thicker since we added that in. So we need to really hurry and get this into our mold before it gets too thick. So that should be good enough. So we've got our mold here. So we're going to go ahead and get that in the mold as quickly as possible. We want to make sure we press it down to remove any air bubbles. You can also tap it. That will also help. But this mixture is really thick, so even tapping it is a little difficult. So we just got to really press it in there. So I was hoping this soap would come out kind of purplish pink with the addition of that raspberry juice, but that didn't work out so well. Maybe if I had used more, that might have helped. Alright, so we got a nice even layer here. And if you want to smooth it out, you can do that, or you can just leave it kind of rough like this, which is kind of nice also. Gives it a little bit of texture on one side. So you want to tap it really hard to get all those bubbles out. So we're going to go ahead and put this extras into one of these things here, and this time I just use my hands to just push that in. So there we got a little soap ball. So the next thing I'm going to do is just cover these with a plastic bag, and they'll just sit in here. I just let them sit maybe 24 hours, and then they're pretty much ready to go. So I just used some grocery bags. So I'm just going to tuck those into a grocery bag. Same with the loaf mold. Alright, we'll just go ahead and check back on these tomorrow. Alright, we are back, and it's been about 24 hours, so it's time to unmold our soaps. So here is the leftover soaps. So I actually made two balls, one big one and one little one. So I'm just going to put these over here on a wire rack to dry a little bit more. And the nice thing about these guys is it's really easy to get the soap out. You just push on the bottom and they pop right out. So over here I actually have some soap that I made about a week or two ago. So this one is using Palmarosa essential oil. And then here is our loaf. So for this one we just kind of pull on the sides to loosen it up a little bit. And then we should be able to pop that right out of there too. Just kind of press on the bottom. Give it a shake, and there we go. So I'm going to just let this cure just a little bit longer over here on this wire rack. And I usually just let it sit for about a week or so, and then I will slice that up into bars. So this one here is probably ready to slice into bars, so I'll go ahead and show you how I do that. You can buy a soap cutter on Amazon, or you could just use a regular knife if you don't have one. So here is the soap cutter that I like to use. You definitely don't need anything this fancy. You can buy just these cutters here from Amazon, and you can just kind of eyeball it and cut it into whatever size you want. But I like this guy here, because you can change and be consistent with the sizing of your soaps. So we have this little thing here, so you can actually unscrew these and move this, slide this in and out depending on how thick or thin you want your soaps. So I already have it set. I don't remember, it's probably about an inch or so. And I'm just going to, there's some little grooves that you can put these in, and then all you do is press down to the bottom and then pull back up, and the soap usually sticks to the cutter here, so then you could just kind of twist it off and then set it aside. And then I usually After cutting them into bars, I usually let them cure for another week or so. And after they're done curing, I like to use this stamp to stamp it with my my logo. The name of my soaps is Salt and Scents, so the stamp here has two S's that are kind of intertwined. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut the rest of these. So this time it slid right off, so if it slides off, all you have to do is pull that back, and there we go. So you'll see the cut sides are nice and straight. All the corners are all straight except for the very top. It's a little bit jagged, which it's just kind of a artisanal, I guess, effect. But if you want it smooth, you could shave off the top to make it completely square. But I kind of like the texture on one side. And these soaps will last for years. So you can make a batch of soap and just kind of put it in. I usually keep them in like a shoebox or something, but they'll be good for many years. So we're running out of room on this rack. Another one here. Alright, so we're all done. This last one might be just slightly thicker than the others, but it's pretty close. So we ended up with 3, 6, 7 bars from each loaf. And again, you can make them bigger or smaller if you want. So I'll go ahead and stamp one of these soaps that I made earlier, and you can see what the stamp looks like. And I had these custom made from someone on Instagram. I'll have to look back and see who did that, but there's a lot of places you can get these custom molds done. So there is our stamp. You can see it says SS for Salt and Scents. So I'm going to go ahead and stamp the rest of these. So here they are, all stamped. So you want to kind of evenly space them out so they have lots of airflow in between them. And we'll just let these sit for probably about a week or so, and then we'll be ready to use those. So that's how I make my hot process soaps using a slow cooker. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you again soon. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. You can also find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook.